shall we go ahead and get the meeting started? Thank you all for coming. And Rita, would you like to lead us in the pledge? As soon as I turn around, I'm having a little, here I go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and now we'll go around with introductions. Let's start with Michael.
Michael Daugelli. I'm in East County. I've received services through the Tri-Delta Transit.
Shira Keiki and the Paratransit.
Tom Horace, Tri-Delta Transit.
Kim Ridgway, AC Transit.
Misha Carr with the City of Richmond.
Could you say that again? Nisha, thank you. And I'm Janet Abelson, West County Paratransit user.
Rita Xavier, representing the Advisory Council on Aging.
Belinda Groves via San Pablo.
Debbie Toth, Rehabilitation Services of Northern California.
Josh Sullivan, Contra Costa DD Council.
Okay, and now we'll go to the staff.
Peter Engel, CCTA staff.
Irene Ortega, CCTA staff.
Ty Boyle, Mobility Matters. John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
Did we get everybody? Well, thank you all for coming today, and we do have a quorum. And so we'll go to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the PCC review of Program 12, Transportation for Seniors and People with Disabilities, from the preliminary draft transportation expenditure plan, which was released on April the 8th. And it's for possible action. And I guess for members here, this sheet is going around. Has anybody over here not signed? You've all signed. Has anybody over here not signed? Everybody signed? Okay, great. Okay. And are you going to give us a staff report, Peter?
Yeah, I can give you a brief staff report.
Okay.
At your last meeting, you had asked to have the possibility of providing some comment on Program 12 as a PCC. There's a special authority board meeting this coming Wednesday, the 20th, and that would be an opportunity to provide that input. So we had this meeting today for you to discuss this item. My understanding is, besides the language of the program itself, there may be brought to the board an opportunity to look at it at instead of 25 years, 30 years, and the associated funding that would come with those additional 5 years. And that would be something that you might want to discuss if you also wanted to ask the authority bump up the funds in this program a little bit. So that's preliminary. That's going to be potentially it might not be brought up as an option, but it's something that our board might consider at this meeting on the 20th. So that's the introductory comments. I'll open the floor to you all to discuss this particular program, and if you have any questions, I can try and answer that.
Well, so Program 12 as is proposed is on page 4 of our agenda packet,
That's correct.
right?
That's correct.
Okay, and I'm not sure if everyone has had an opportunity to take a look at it. Do we want to go over it? Just say, Peter, maybe if you don't mind, if you could read through it for us, just
Sure.
so that we're all, it's fresh in our memories
Yeah.
what it says. And this is the proposed measure. This is not the existing measure.
Correct.
Right?
And just to be clear, the existing measure is not changing. So current Measure J and all the funding associated with that, and how the expenditure plan splits that funding out to the operators is not going to change. That money is still there. So this is an additional program available that would be on top of what it's under Measure J. Okay?
Are there any questions about that? Okay.
So I'll just read the language. Funding in this category is to support mobility opportunities for seniors and people with disabilities who, due to age or disability, cannot drive or take other transit options. To ensure services are delivered in a coordinated system that maximizes both service delivery and efficiency, an accessible transportation service, ATS, strategic plan will be developed and periodically updated during the term of the measure. Excuse me. No funding under this category will be allocated until the ATS strategic plan has been developed and adopted. An overarching component in the development and delivery of the ATS strategic plan is using mobility management to ensure coordination and efficiencies and accessible service delivery. The plan will evaluate the appropriate model for our local structure, including how accessible services are delivered by all agencies and where appropriate coordination can improve transportation services, estimate gaps in service, and find efficiencies in the service delivered. The ATS strategic plan would also determine...
Excuse me, I think you said estimate instead of eliminate.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I?
I think so.
Sorry, okay. Eliminate gaps in service and find efficiencies in the service delivered. The ATS strategic plan would also determine the investments and oversight of the program, funding, and identify timing, projects, delivery, or service delivery options, administrative structure, and fund leverage opportunities. The ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from publicly operated transit and paratransit providers and selected nonprofit and citizen stakeholders representing seniors and people with disabilities. Public transit operators in Contra Costa must participate in the ATS planning process to be eligible to receive funding in this category. The ATS strategic plan must be adopted within 12 months of the passage of this measure. And then there's a breakout of basically everything in the TEP is broken out by subregion. So this particular line item 12, this program has $77.6 million in it for the life of the loan, and that's in, or the life of the measure, and that's in current dollars for 2016, I believe. So it'll be allocated as that works out to 3.3% of the total funding. In Central County, it's $20.1 million. In Southwest County, it's $4.7 million. In West County, it's $22.9 million. And in East County, it's $29.9 million.
Maybe we could start off with any questions in the, just so that we all have a common understanding of the language. Michael?
My first question would be, this appears to eliminate any funding towards fixed transit, correct? Because it does say that this is for people who cannot access the fixed route system. Is that a misunderstanding on my part, or am I reading it correctly?
No, fixed route service is covered under Program 11, which is not in here, and that's what we're calling bus transit and non-rail transit funding.
Maybe we could just kind of go around the room. Do you have any other questions?
Okay, if that's well, it wouldn't be a question; it would just be a comment that if that's
Well,
the case,
let's leave comments. I was hoping till
yeah. So in
reading
other
those are
words, so
questions.
this would be paratransit only.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Sharon, do you have it? Tom? Oh, that was fast.
Yeah, wow, it just jumped around here. So again, this is 3.3% of the global plan is dedicated towards people with seniors and folks with disabilities. Okay,
That's correct.
So again, sitting on the couch, putting on the PCC hat and the DD side, honestly, I would just put forth concern that
We're going to do that after we do the questions.
oh, just questions.
Just
Okay,
questions.
So
now, yeah.
3.3%.
Did you have a question about it?
In the study, if we were to actually look at citizenship, are we matching roughly 3.3% scaled up if you take seniors and folks with disabilities? coupled against the general population of the county?
If I understand your question correctly, no. The study will basically look at service delivery, potential service delivery models, mobility management, those types of programs, and establish ways that this 3.3% can be used to support accessible transportation services in the most efficient and way as possible, and also providing the best service for folks that are unable to ride any public transit service. So if they need, if they need somebody to stay with them in an appointment, or door-through-door type services, things like that. So kind of above, not only including ADA, but above and beyond ADA services as well. So frail elderly that can't take fixed route or paratransit, for instance, things like that. All that will be considered. I think your question was more, if I'm reading it correctly, is the 3.3% appropriate as compared to senior disabled populations? And that is not being considered at this time as part of this. This study is looking more at the population itself and the best way to provide services to that population versus a comparison of percentage of that population to the entire population and whether the amount's appropriate.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So then this actually kind of piggybacks more off of Michael's. Was there any consideration towards adapting the system for maximum flexibility that really does address the complexity of types of mobility that our two populations include? So let's do a very simple breakdown. I always go down conditional eligibility. So we have folks that during the day can absolutely use fixed route transportation but are deemed ineligible because they can during the day. And then the moment the sun goes down, they have a different level of need and no mobility. There's nothing there to serve them because of how the system is built right now.
Yeah, so ideally that type of comparison in this strategic study we would hopefully find some of that information. And if you look at different needs within the senior disabled population as far as their ability to take different services that currently exist, there could be resources then provide, that could gauge maybe where some of the resources go into providing. If there's certain populations that really none of the services work for them, then we'd look to fill that gap, things like that.
So, but I think this, if I understand correctly, your daytime, nighttime thing, I'm not sure what you're defining as the reason for they can do it during the day but not at night.
Well,
but,
in personal experience, there was a gentleman that I served for years, and he had a visual impairment that significantly changed his ability to gauge depth and distance the moment that light
got dark. Okay, so let me just address what I think is the ADA answer to that. You can be conditionally eligible. So for some trips you can be eligible and other trips not under the ADA paratransit rule. So in your example, I think what that means is that during the day he would, if all the rules were being applied, sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. If they aren't, it means he's always eligible. But if they're being applied in the way that looks at the conditional situation, I guess, then in the daytime he could take fixed route, and at night he would be eligible because he lacked the visual acuity in the evening hours to travel.
So then I guess my follow-up question to you then would be, looking at our community and the needs-based drive that most of our service models are built on, do we want to build a system that's just at the base ADA requirement, or should we be striving to find those gaps and filling them? Another example.
It's not a gap under the ADA in that example.
Well,
the point is, for example, I'll use myself as an example, actually. I can get some places on fixed route by myself. and other places I can't at all. Okay, I want to go to a, I don't know if this is a good example, but I think it is. Wherever this thing is on Thursday, this seminar is inaccessible to me without on fixed route, but I could get there on paratransit. Okay, so things are already set up that way for it to work that way. So that's not going to make it work is not going beyond even the requirement of the ADA. But this doesn't actually speak about the ADA either. Is the other point I would point out.
The two things that I would say to counter that is you've already been deemed eligible for paratransit.
Conditionally.
So let's take away the vision and go down another path. There's a young lady that I know who uses a power wheelchair, and she has the vision, she has the depth perception, she has everything, but the moment it starts raining, her power wheelchair malfunctions. So she's deemed ineligible for paratransit because she has the skills to be able to do this. But the weather changes her mobility
That would be,
level.
at least where I come from, she would be eligible conditionally.
I would love to come from where you come from.
East Bay, paratransit. Deb, are you finished? Okay, Debbie?
So I'm just asking a clarifying question. This study is going to look at need, not necessarily eligibility, correct?
The study could look at both. That level hasn't been defined yet. There's going to have to be some discussion as to, I mean, the ADA is an unfunded mandate, and it basically, gives people equal access to fixed route. But there's people that have needs that can't take fixed route because of their condition, nor can they take a paratransit service.
Right.
So there's a need that is not filled by ADA.
I have some questions if we're done with the other questions. Are you still in questions? Okay. You wanted to go first, and then I'll go after you? Go ahead. Oh, okay. The questions I had, when you were reading through it, Peter, not that this has anything to do with anything you did, because I don't even think you wrote this, but the paragraph on page 4, the last one, where it talks about citizen stakeholders, I kind of cringed when I saw that, because to me the word citizen means that you are a citizen of the United States of America, and I don't think we mean that. I think that we mean maybe resident or something else like that. Okay. Then in that same sentence it says people with disabilities, but don't we mean people with transportation disabilities? Not all disabilities? So if you had a disability, which I'm not going to bother to try to think of because I was having trouble doing it, but if you had a disability that had nothing to do with transportation, then that's not the right person to be looking at this on behalf of people with disabilities that are transportation disabilities, it would seem to me. So the residents who are the stakeholder, the people who are residents of our county that are the users. I think this actual phrase maybe needs another change. It says users. Don't we want users of the system? Is that what we mean, rather than any kind of a disability at all?
Riders.
I don't know. That's a good question for all of you. My first thought is, if you currently can't use the system because it doesn't work for you, then we want their input.
But it's based on, we've already said seniors. Seniors, you don't have to have a disability
Correct.
under our current rules, so I would assume that's what that means. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we're only talking about non-seniors who have disabilities, but it seems to me that disabilities should be transportation disabilities, not any old disabilities. Right? Okay, usually
I think, are you suggest, I'm not, let me see if so are you suggesting a person that is disabled but doesn't really have a transportation issue, maybe because they can use their car still? Maybe it's a wheelchair?
No, that's well, no, I wasn't. I was suggesting that they had, I can't think of what one is offhand, but can you, Kim? Because I'm just going to the definition of the way it is in other sections. If you've got a disability that is about, that's why I was not thinking of what one example of one was, had nothing to do with transportation. So it has nothing to do with getting from point A to point B. Maybe it has to do with I don't know if this is a good example, but I have a problem remembering names, okay? And it's because I have a brain injury. So that maybe, let's say that that's an example of one that's not a transportation disability. So shouldn't we in this, shouldn't that people with disabilities be people with transportation disabilities? I'm not defining what that means.
So I think what we're looking at is for people who are unable to take traditional transportation, people who need some sort of accessible transportation.
Fixed route?
So it's anybody who has a barrier to either traditional forms of transportation or fixed route transportation. I think we're looking at barriers to transportation, not necessarily a transportation-related disability. So we want to seek out people who can't drive a car, get on BART or the bus, whether it's 24/7 that they can't do that or 5 minutes of the day that they can't do it. But if there is a gap in the ability to get from A to B for somebody, for whatever reason, we need to know the need.
Tom? I'm sorry, not Michael.
Yeah, I just had a friend in San Leandro recently that he was not approved for ADA eligibility on the local transit agency because he had a childhood condition where his left arm is shriveled. I'm not sure exactly what the disability was, and they said that's not related to transportation. In other words, he does have a physical disability, but it doesn't affect his ability to walk to a bus stop and to get on the bus. So that would be a physical example of something. I'm not sure exactly what that condition is called. Maybe like multiple sclerosis or something when he was really young that affected the one arm, but it doesn't affect his ability to get to a transportation stop or to use public transit. So he was not able to get ADA certified for that reason. So that would be a physical example that you might want to think about. Because you were asking
although I don't think we're actually limiting it, are we? Or are we? In this description, we're not limiting it to ADA, are we? I don't see those words here, so I don't think they're intended to be. I mean, my assumption is, in reading the language here, that since it doesn't doesn't use the words ADA, then I don't think it means that. But when we start talking about the ADA and assuming that that's the limit of it, but even some of the things the ADA does, the example that I think you had, Josh, where the day and night thing because of night blindness, that even the ADA would recognize that. So Anyway, that's all. Just, do we cover your question?
Really, you brought the issue up. That's why I gave you an example.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was, I know that there are examples, but anyway. Now, you were next, I think, though, Josh. Didn't you have another one? Or somebody over here? Everybody here's got all their questions answered? Okay, and everybody over there? Okay. And let's see if I had any others. I had a question. In the in Measure J, we delayed implementation of Measure J until there was a study done. Oh, it's just Measure C. In Measure J, we eliminated. No, we didn't. What we did was we said that you couldn't just equally divide the money across the years. We had to reserve the money for later. I'm sure of that. On the theory that there would be more people having a disability 20 years from now than there are now?
Yes. So under Measure J, the amount that is allocated increases by 0.1% every year.
Right. So what this is saying is that, once again, we're not going to give out the money to the people who need it now, who won't be alive later. Are we really trying to do that for the third time here? It looks to me like that is it.
This is similar to what happened under Measure C, in that this funding was that the allocation was put into the expenditure plan, but the funds were not allocated until there was a planning process done that showed how those funds were to be spent, how they were to be allocated, and that's what led to the funds
study
that have gone to all of the operators that get those funds now.
Right.
And this study is following that to a certain extent, and that we're entering, into this whole new idea of mobility management, and we need to figure out what's appropriate to spend these funds on and what's not appropriate.
But the issue that I guess
with the 12-month limit,
if you happen to be alive and a disabled person, this will be the third time that there's not funding going to the people who have disabling conditions and who are seniors now. It's for those people in the future, and this will be the third time that's happening, oftentimes to the same would-be users. Yeah, okay, in Measure C, it's exactly what Peter said, actually. In Measure C, they didn't implement the distribution of the money from Measure C for paratransit until a study was done, which took a couple years, I think? Year or two? I was here. I remember it took a long time. Okay, so then Measure J came along, which is where we are now. And in Measure J, they said, well, this is a long period of time for Measure J, 25 years? Okay, and they're 25, in the future there will be more people, therefore more seniors, more disabled people as a function of an increase in population than there are today. So let's not give out equal portions of the money each year. Let's give out a higher percent each year. Okay, so if you happen to be a person now, you're not getting the money in the beginning of Measure C, and you're getting it at a slowed pace in Measure J. And if this one comes along and says, as Peter pointed out, like Measure C, where it says you're not getting it at all, then there are a number of people who are just going to simply no longer be alive. And that's my point. A question.
So that clarifies what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Measure J continues during this time, so all the existing providers are continuing to get their funding through this. This is in addition, above and beyond. I think what could be added to address your concern is that funding continues through the study. So waiting for a study to be completed is not going to stop any kind of existing funding streams that are happening. Does that address the issue? Because I hear what you're saying.
As a voter, it doesn't, because it says that only people in the future out where the people who are seniors now, for example, have been for a period of time in two different ways already denied funding, and now this would do it again. We could do this differently so that that wouldn't happen. We could come up with a formula that said, this is just an example, not how it would have to be done. It could be based on the same allocation. The money that would be proportional for, let's say the study took a year. Okay, then for that the money from that year could actually be distributed in the Measure J way, in the way that it would have been if it were part of Measure J. And so that people could at least get something out of it instead of nothing out of it, because they're not going to ever get compensated, because they're not going to be alive. People aren't going to likely be alive, although maybe somebody might be, but if it's 25 years or even 30 years, people aren't going to be alive, even though they'll get to pay for it. They won't get to get any benefit out of it. And this would be the third time that we would be asking people in this category and not asking it of any other category, I think. So we're not saying that fixed route operators, they have to do a study first. We're not saying to people who get street money, they have to do a study first. We're just saying it to people who want paratransit money, there has to be a study first. And it doesn't seem equitable.
I totally hear what you're saying, and maybe if there's no way you're going to be able to do a study and get people elevated services without knowing where the money should be going to appropriately fund the money. That's the whole idea of doing the study. But I totally understand what you're saying is that people are paying into something that they may die out of before they get the benefit of. Mm-hmm. And unless you double fund the first year, which may be an option, so that you feel like somebody's getting something out of what they're paying into their taxes. But if we don't do the study, we continue with status quo. And status quo is that people have to spend 6 hours to go from Hercules to Bay Point. That's not acceptable. And so I think looking at, and that's just one example of sort of a broken system, but we have to look at what the need is. We have to look at the way that we do things, and we have to look at how we can do them more efficiently and better for the rider. I think all of that needs to happen, but maybe there's a way to double up that first year so that it addresses that issue. And I don't know if that's the case, but to me...
But we're taking it away from the people may not be around to take advantage of what you just said if we don't. So there needs to be a way to compensate at some level. Because the point is they aren't getting the part of the measure. Let's call this Measure X. I like to call it Measure X. This new measure. If Measure X is taking money from all of us. It's a sales tax. Everybody pays the sales tax, right? Pretty much. Everybody I know does. Even my 13-year-old granddaughter pays it. And there's something in there for everybody, theoretically, right? People who go in cars, people go on buses, people who go on ferries, except not people who go on paratransit, because we have to do a study first. So if we just said, okay, we're going to have a placeholder way for today's people to get something out of it, rather than only tomorrow's people, then that would, it seems to me, answer that question. But when you say tomorrow's people can get twice as much, but today's people still don't get anything, that's what, it just is not equitable across the types of transportation being funded by this. You know, it's not like it's not like there was a study that had to be done across all subject areas like fixed route, roads, you know, ferries, everything. There's no it's just paratransit. Mm-hmm.
So Madam Chair, is that a comment on maybe the input we can give to Peter or to the main body that we report to from this council would be to do some sort of triage in the interim while a plan is being developed for the future?
That could be the sort of thing.
Yeah.
It could be, and I'm not saying at all which way specifically it would be.
I mean, maybe just highlight the critical nature that there are unmet needs today. And if we're doing a needs-based assessment, we should have some consideration for the folks that are falling through the cracks today.
Today, right.
And that, I think that would, Peter, is that acceptable in regards to what we could put forward? Peter's down with anything?
I'm not part of the decision-making body on that. So. But I did want to clarify, Madam Chair, there are some programs in the expenditure plan that don't receive funding right away. Return to source is not sent out to the cities until after a full year, so that we know exactly how much money came in. There's also some programs that are done through our planning department, ped bike type stuff that are grant-based, and we let those funds accumulate for a while, so there's enough to actually do some projects. So there are some cases where funding isn't sent out.
It's not based on doing a study.
That's correct.
That I think is true, because I've asked that question elsewhere. And I see people around me getting older every day, and then they die, right? Everybody dies. And I know people who have died and they didn't get part of this money that would have gotten part of this money. And it bothers me, actually, that we think that it's necessary to delay it for paratransit, but we don't. You obviously have to delay it because when you don't have the money yet. So that's not to be a real delay, because we don't even have, we can't, we don't have it yet. But I know people who die, people die, and they don't, this is people more at the end of their life than the beginning of their life. And then we're telling them they have to wait, and that doesn't, it's hard to sell a measure like this, where it says, yeah, everybody else can kind of get it, but seniors and people with disabilities, they have to wait. It's just hard to sell that kind of a measure. Anyway, we've spent probably more than enough time on that topic. Let me just look at one. I have one other thing underlined. Let's see. Oh, I think that was the same thing. Okay. So now we've gone through okay, go ahead.
I
Please.
wanted to ask a question about
Michael?
something you had mentioned earlier about that stop at the Hilton that's not accessible to you. And I think this is an interesting question for ADA access. That stop is the buses don't go by there during the week, but they do on the weekend. It's a very strange kind of a thing. Is that something that would be affected by an ADA requirement? Like, for example, they have a bus stop there, but it's not served very frequently during the week. Is that the issue that you were concerned about in terms of your access to that Hilton? That would be an interesting question. It's served on the
Well,
weekend.
yeah, that happens all the time. It's like people can't go to church if the service doesn't run on Sunday. If there's no fixed route service on Sunday, then people who ride ADA paratransit can't go to church, right? yeah, it is that same, only there's other things too, all during the week. So do we have all our questions we think, at least for the moment, asked? And so now why don't we start with comments that we have about how this should be changed, added to, and what else could we do to this? Delete, I guess, some section if we wanted. That's what we're looking to do here, right?
You're looking to request that the authority make revisions based on comments from the PCC.
Okay. Do you want to start, Michael? And we'll
Yes,
just go.
I have a little thing prepared here and listening to what everybody has said. I think since ADA is an unfunded mandate, some money should be appropriated to transportation agencies to reduce the impact on the true cost of paratransit so that these agencies can provide more service. Because it mentions that one of the things these funds would be used for would be to make sure that there's more service available, and that would be one way to do it, at least in my opinion.
Okay. And can we make are we making a list of these as they're said right now? Are we doing that, Irene? Are you doing that? Because once we make a list, then it's at the end of it all, we'll come back and vote on it, right? So is that what we're going to be doing? Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay.
I would comment on that.
Okay.
If I can.
Please.
I would suggest that, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not going to mean more ADA service. This is just going to mean it's such a small amount of money. It's most likely going to mean it's just going to be eaten up without additional service. That's just my thoughts. I mean, I guess technically if you're offsetting some of the ADA costs, then you have more costs to provide fixed route service, which you're going to also have to provide ADA service to. So I'm not so sure that unless you're talking big percentages of money, it's going to really make an impact.
Are you talking about just that 1 year?
I'm
No.
assuming we're talking about the whole measure.
The reasoning be, if I might jump in, that ADA service is required to be provided by federal law if you provide fixed route service. So to change the amount of money that goes into ADA service is not going to change how much they have to provide. And it still isn't going to equal the total cost of providing ADA service. So that's why you're saying what you're saying, right, Peter? Kind of?
Yeah. I'm just suggesting at this dollar amount, you're not going to see any significant increase in fixed route service. I think it'd be more likely that that category 11 would increase service and then potentially increase, they would also have to increase paratransit service, although that's probably not true because where we are expecting to see increases in fixed route services and frequencies, which should have no effect on additional paratransit service. The only things that will affect adding additional paratransit service would be either increasing service hours till earlier or later or weekends where they currently don't exist, or service area that would require paratransit service. So,
Michael, do you want to alter your comments based on anything that was said?
No, not at all. In fact, it makes me a little bit firmer in my belief that I think that if it does increase the fixed route hours and length of service, that it would increase. But Tom, I'm not actually part of the agency, so even though I sit on the board occasionally, I'm just thinking that if you're adding service, that would increase paratransit availability.
May I?
Please.
Actually, Peter, I can see it both ways. Yes, the amounts of money involved would more than likely, I would say, be used to bolster existing. But anytime we are in our service area, there is opportunity to add fixed route service, and we're not running out to do it. And one of the costs that has to be considered involved is any additional paratransit service requirements that would occur. I mean, they have to be looked at. It's not part of the decision-making process. That would be a violation of federal law if we did. However, to say that we would do it without without considering it would be suspect on our part. Thus, funding like this can be used potentially for us both ways. But again, I'm talking about our service area. Our service area has unmet needs even in fixed route. I don't think every service area does. So.
Are you finished, Michael? Okay. Sharon, do you want to say anything right now? Okay. Tom, do you want to say anything right now? Kim? No?
Still thinking.
Debbie, do you have comments?
Shocking. Debbie has comments. Oh my gosh. I feel like I need to explain some of the thinking behind the structure of this because it's not necessarily readily evident to everybody when we say what mobility management means. And I think at its very core, philosophically, it is putting the rider at the center of the system. And in essence, when you do that, you lower the cost and the burden on the system by ensuring that you get the most effective in terms of cost and mobility form of transportation for people. And so by planning that and being thoughtful about how we spend the money, we are going to get more bang for the buck over the life of the measure and in order to meet the growing needs of a population that is aging and has disabilities. I think that if we leave ourselves in the box of status quo, we continue to look at fixed route and paratransit and ADA, and that does not meet the needs of everybody. It meets the needs of some people, and it meets it, at least on a paratransit way, in a very expensive way. And unfortunately, we're not in a state of being right now in the United States where we can have congressional change that impacts the ADA fixed route tie to paratransit. So that's going to have to exist. But we don't have to look at that as the only means of transportation for people who need accessible transportation. We can look at cheaper ways. We can look at volunteer driver programs. We can look at church programs. We can look at friend programs. We can look at gas card programs. We can look at community-based organization programs. We can look at a whole host of things that offset the need to provide an ADA trip. They don't take away the requirement, but they offset the need for that trip in a cheaper, more person-centered way. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. Nobody's trying to take away service. And so how do we do that? We do that by looking at the needs, looking at the system, what we have, what we don't, and how we can do better. And I think that that intention is built into this language. That's my comment.
What does that have, how does that impact the wording in section 12 that we're looking at?
I don't have a problem with the way that it's worded. I don't think.
In section 12?
Well, I don't have section 12 in front of me, but
It's
when I
in
read
your,
it,
it's your, you don't have your agenda?
no.
Does somebody have a copy she can have?
When I read it last night, I didn't have a problem with it, but I might
Okay.
today.
We can come back, you can look at it and we can come back to you if you want to add something. How's that? Does
Well,
that work?
Just one thing,
Okay.
the amount. I don't have a problem with the wording except the numbers.
You mean on page 5?
No, number 12 says transportation for seniors and people with disabilities, 3.3%. It should read transportation for seniors and people with disabilities, 5%.
Okay, and are we, what? I thought I heard Peter say we weren't talking about that aspect of it, although that was Peter talking, certainly not me. But okay, so you can make your comment, Debbie. So we've got that recorded as one, should be more money. And it should be, the number it should be is 5%? And are you finished for the moment?
For the moment.
Okay. Josh?
Ditto. Just again, I think as we discussed in the last meeting, the thing that I would want to put forward to this body and maybe to have it brought forward is that the plan itself reflects the community input that was solicited and given, on a global level. And I think that I had asked last time, was it on par with the community response, with the stakeholder engagement? And not so much, or is it, I'm a total numbers guy, so
How these expenditure plans work is you're competing against a whole bunch of other people for funds, and the numbers come out as to what everybody feels they can live with. Whether they're fair or not is not necessarily
accurate or reflective of the community engagement.
Yeah.
In public policy, we talk a lot about, instead of fighting for how big the slice of your pie is, make the pie bigger. In that, could a recommendation, if we come to consensus from this board, be to, say, extend it from 25 to 30 years, and then in return maybe endorse a 3.3 lift up to 5%? So then it's kind of a, public policy-wise, it's a best of both worlds sort of suggestion?
I mean, we could. Here's Peter shaking his head, yes. What I would say is that I don't think there's much of I have a heart. If you say 3.3, but it's over 30 years, then already there's more money. Right. Okay, if you say 3.3 and it goes to 5%, but it's the same number of years, then it's still more. That either way is more money, right? But if you say both, then somebody else lost, or at least they'll think they did.
A finite project. Not everything is an ongoing service. Some things are finite projects.
And by extending that category by 5 years, you free
But I don't know that people quite look at it that way, that I've observed. The project people, and I personally am a program person, not a project person, but the project people tend to think that they should have a certain minimum percent of the total pie as project money. Is that about right, Peter? Yes. Yeah. So they're not going to probably buy that argument, is what I'm thinking. And there are unfortunately, I think, more of them than there are of us.
But I would just add in with that still wouldn't stop us from suggesting it, just because we.
Well, yeah, we can suggest anything we want, and here's another way. This kind of supports what you're saying. I think if we don't suggest it, who in the heck else do we expect to do it? That might be another way to look at it. Are you finished for the moment? Okay, Rita decided she has something to say, I think.
Certain members of EPAC and also some of the RTPCs have already redone their figures and put more towards paratransit, transportation for seniors and people with disabilities. So I don't know how much more they're going to be willing to do because they've already revised the figures in our favor. That's just a comment.
I think if it stays at 25 years, you're going to have trouble finding support for raising that 3.3 to 5 just because nobody's willing to give it up someplace else. If it extends to 30 years, now you're talking about more money, and maybe, I don't know if you can get it up to 5, but maybe you can there's support. There's a lot of support for the program, but the numbers fall out where they fall out. There's a lot of support for a lot of programs, but this is one that gets a lot of support. So never hurts to ask.
Here's a thing that I would be concerned about, though, and that goes back to what was just described as the mobility management definition. The mobility management definition sort of, I think, takes a dig at fixed route providers of paratransit services, and it also takes a dig at the city programs, which I think are only located in West County. Is that right? Yeah. So, because it's saying somebody else out there that the volunteer-based programs in the list of things that were suggested can do it more effectively than those programs can. And they have all these requirements, like it has to be accessible to everybody, like people in wheelchairs, for example. Yeah, some people can take people around in a car, except they can't take around people in my chair in a car. And so the way they're being cheaper is by being less inclusive. And so there's a certain pocket that's not gonna like that. So, if that's the approach, rather than saying we're going to have, in the case of the 3 city-based programs, more money for those programs too, or more money for the ADA operators who could make improvements in their service if they had more money too. I know that's true that you could do that, right, Kim? If you had more money, you could provide more effective service. I can think of some ways that you could do it, in fact. But by increasing the number of operators, phone operators that answer the phone, and all kinds of different things that would be service related that you could do if you had money. Right. So that it needs to be somehow said in a way that means that people are not, let me say this right, riders are not excluded from using these services based on their disability.
So on that, Madam Chair, I would throw in that I just looked it over as we were talking.
Yeah.
I like the way the language structures it. Mobility management isn't mentioned, and just as an absolute geek, I'm still counting on my flying car within the next 30 years. So we don't know what the system is that's going to be able to meet folks 10, 20, 30 years down the line. I think the language is appropriate to that it's not alienating users of mobility management services or folks who use paratransit, fixed route, anything else. And the fact that might change over the duration of this TEP. I wouldn't say it's highly likely. Guaranteed. We have to know what we don't know, and that's 30 years out.
So where does it say, for example, using the obvious example that I just gave of people in power wheelchairs, which can't get in a lot of vehicles?
First sentence
Where does
says,
it say everyone's included?
says for seniors and people with disabilities who, due to age or disability.
Could you tell me which
The
paragraph
first
you're in?
sentence in under
The
12.
whole thing? Okay.
Under 12, the first sentence.
Okay. So how do we say that if you're a provider of services, you have to provide it to all, or some way, no, I don't know about all, but say, you have to say that you're inclusive. How do we say that here?
Janet, can you clarify what you're asking?
I'm asking for some wording so that I don't have the feeling that the way things are being done is with volunteer drivers. If they do things with volunteer drivers, they also have to find a way to get people like me around who can't do that, because you can't get this in a car is the reason in that example. I just had a problem with that today. Right, Rita?
That's. But I think that's included in this. But that's totally expected. Not every single form of transportation can meet the needs of everybody who's riding it. So there have to be multiple options. So paratransit can't serve people with late-stage Alzheimer's disease. They really need somebody who knows them to be with them so they feel safe and secure, and they may need one-on-one. Whereas somebody might be able to take paratransit. Somebody who needs help with the groceries getting through their door may need a volunteer, but they don't need a wheelchair to get around. There has to be a different service for different needs. So we can't lump them all under one category. And what we've done, just using the same vehicle that County Connection uses to take people with late-stage Alzheimer's disease and people who need help with grocery shopping, we've offset their ADA burden by providing those trips for less money and doing a higher level and different kind of service than what ADA mandates. So we have to be able to have flexibility in this language, and I think the language is very flexible and meets that need.
But what it can't do is say that you're not taking people like me around because you're using volunteer drivers, because I did hear you say that. And
that is one of
the
many
volunteer
options.
Actually, it's not so much that I've heard you say that, it's that I've heard other people say that. And so that we need to, we can't, there are some trips that are more expensive to provide than others. And I would imagine that using the wheelchair, the power wheelchair example, it's one of the more expensive ones because it can only be done in a certain kind of a vehicle. And it takes a lot of time to do the securement. There are all these reasons why it takes more resources to do that kind of a trip. But we can't have a system where, because somebody can provide if people can go in let's say a car, a sedan type car, that they don't need all those, and they don't need all those tie downs. Yeah, you can get more of those around cheaper, but that isn't really saying anything. It's just, just saying you can take the cheap ones and do them one way. But then what happens to the people who are in the power chairs is, because there isn't as much versatility in providing rides to all places that people need to go, they sit waiting hours for a ride, because that's not for them it's a lousy system to pull off all those people, because they're just sitting there with no ride. And so we have to look at the total picture, not just the ride for one particular category can be done cheaper in one way. All of the rides have to be done. And some are cheaper to provide than others. But what I've seen actually as a function of being on this committee and doing those Caltrans section 5310, is that the right number? Processes, is that they try to compensate, or did, I don't know if they still do it this way, try to compensate for the fact that it's more expensive to take a wheelchair around by a formula that absolutely doesn't work at all, because it doesn't ever, in all the millions of applications I personally have seen, it has never once enabled somebody who had a lot of wheelchair users to get a vehicle. It's just a token. So we have to be careful not to do that kind of a thing. And I think some of the ways that we get at it is by saying, for example, that it in the last paragraph on page 4, we have to be really careful how we word it about who's on the committee, that it needs to include the very people who would be served by the service. and not be heavy on the people whose livelihood depends upon the service existing for a job. You know, I mean, there needs to be, I would say, more of the thing that's now called people with disabilities, but we're in the last two lines. There needs to be more of those than nonprofit as citizen stakeholders. You know, it needs to be the people themselves.
So, so I actually, and I do think the citizen, that was it has some
Yeah.
unintended consequences.
Right.
Put it in there. But what about just individuals, individual seniors and people with disabilities as the suggestion? So that way it's not residents, because even residency status does go down that citizenship path.
Right.
But just people.
Yeah, it's better, I think, but I think you're right. That if it were, let's say it were all people with disabilities and seniors, but it had to be seniors who would actually ride the service, not seniors who would drive around in a Cadillac or something. You know? And because there are a lot of seniors who don't need this service and wouldn't get in this service if their life depended upon it. My husband recently became a paratransit rider, and let me tell you, all he could do was complain about it, and he didn't want to be there, and he actually got his driver's license back, at least for a little while, recently, and it's just like, there are lots of people like that, and there's nothing wrong with not needing the service. In fact, that's great, you know, if you're able to get around without it, but shouldn't the people who will be using the service be the ones helping to decide, not what?
At least adequately represented.
Maybe the majority of those. The only people I can perhaps see are those who are cognitively unable to participate in an effective way. If I said that correctly, maybe I did and maybe I didn't.
I was coming up to, and then you said in an effective way, and I back up. So not necessarily excluding folks that have an intellectual or developmental disability, but excluding folks that couldn't, you know, be productive to the process.
You know, and even then, I've seen it at this very committee. We've had participation by people who lacked the full ability to participate, but they were always able to participate in a way that I think was meaningful to us. And so even there, we need to be careful about what we say and do.
So again, I would just advocate for maybe nonprofit and individuals with disabilities and who are seniors or something like that, just where we directly target people.
Why are we talking about nonprofits and?
Because that's immediately preceding the citizen stakeholder clause there in the
No, but why are we talking about groups rather than people?
Yeah, it's all in there.
I think we can say that we could actually even eliminate the nonprofit, because the nonprofits are the nonprofits are stakeholders representing. So it could be
Those who
publicly
are unable
operated
to represent
transit
themselves?
and paratransit providers and stakeholders representing seniors. Could be seniors themselves. They don't have to be some agency. That could be seniors. It could be people with disabilities. It could be agencies that represent those groups. But maybe adding something about transit dependent or mobility. What's the right word? Mobility.
Users.
Well, the problem
It's
is
not the right word, but that's what it means.
the problem is that, as Peter pointed out before, there are people who don't have any options right now. So we need to include them. Not everybody who rides is everybody who can. It's everybody who can ride what we currently have. So we can't exclude people who don't have an option that meets their needs, like maybe some power wheelchair users who don't have fixed route in their neighborhood. You know, they may not have a paratransit option. So there has to be something that catches everyone with who either is a rider or has the potential to ride, whom it impacts. And
But why not have it be a rider? My point is user is, I think, the word I like more than any other word, except for the category of people who are unable to represent themselves. And for that, I would have it be a person speaking on their behalf. But I'm not worrying at the moment about what my language is too much. But the point is, I think it's better to have a person with a disability speak for people with disabilities than it is to have an agency speak for them, if the person is able to do so. And one thing that would take me a long way personally would be, as we said, that a majority of the people who were working on this plan, this ATC strategic plan, would be, in fact, users of the service.
Or potential.
Users of the future service, they would, I don't know how you would say potential. What does that mean?
Existing and potential users.
I
So
didn't
people
say-
who are going to either have some sort of incident occur that they can no longer take fixed route, but they don't need it today. So it has to include.
Well, what I was thinking is people who already can't use it today, so that they know what it means, what it's like to do it, so the experience of it, not through somebody else's eyes, but through their own eyes. That a majority of the people on this committee would, in fact, be users of the future system immediately. In other words, it really is offensive to me if I go to a meeting. When I first got on this very committee in its old state, which was when it reported to the Board of Supervisors, which was before CCTA even existed, I was the only person with a disability on the committee. And they, I think, actually thought it was a little odd that I was here. It wasn't here. They met at a place I couldn't get to, actually, at the County I don't know if anyone's here from County Connection. No. Anyway, their office, and special arrangements had to be made so I could even get there, because there was no paratransit. And that's the epitome of what I don't want to see in this system. What I want to see is a system where, in fact, the people who have experienced getting these kinds of rides, who can speak firsthand about it, can do so, and who are not looking, who are not absent. I mean, even on this, the group that's here today, I don't even know that users are in the majority. I think they're not. Pretty positive they're not. Looking around the table. And that gives you a different view of the world than if you, I spent half my morning, for example, trying to figure out how I could go to an event that Rita is, you're going to, right, Rita? Yeah.
Yeah, because I got a ride.
Because she got a ride. But I couldn't get a ride because I couldn't easily go in anyone's car. So that's the sort of world that people like me live in, okay? And I think that's a different experience than a person who works in an agency, who doesn't have to go home and then figure out, spend half their morning figuring out if they can go to an event just like everyone else, because they can't go just like everyone else. I'll stop talking because I probably talk too much. But anyway, so if we wanted to do what I was saying, it would be something about saying, just even adding a sentence that said a majority of the members of this, working on this plan, however you say that, would be people who are seniors or who have disabilities, transportation disabilities. That would solve that problem.
May I make a wording suggestion for that area that we have? It says the ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from publicly operated, well, I think it should just be paratransit providers, and selected stakeholders, with the majority of the membership being in the stakeholder side. So whatever percentage, if we want to make it a number, like, with the majority being stakeholders.
So stakeholders are people with a transportation disability?
That's right, because that's how that sentence finishes. Yeah.
Anybody?
I don't want to discount your experience, Janet, because it's your experience and it's real for many people. But it's not the experience of everyone, and we need to make sure that we're inclusive of everyone. Everyone who has some sort of barrier to riding from point A to point B, be it in a car, be it in a train, be it in a shared bus, be it in a volunteer car, be it in a flying vehicle, whatever. We need to make sure that we're inclusive of everybody and that we have representation, not that one takes precedence over the other. But I can assure you that the people that we serve in our Alzheimer's program cannot come and represent what their needs are. So there have to be providers. I also will venture to say that not every service I utilize, I'm an expert at defining how it needs to be provided. So we have to have experts who do it for a living in the room. There has to be a mix, and it's not... I think there just needs to be representation, and it needs to be fair and adequate and far-reaching for people who provide and use the system.
I'm not sure that what you just said is inconsistent with what was just said. I think it is just saying where the majority of the people on the group are coming from, I think, is what the difference is. Is that right, Michael, the way you said it?
I would agree, because I agree totally with what Debbie said, too. It should be, I'm just saying that it should be put there that the majority will be individual stakeholders.
So Michael had a great suggestion. So I would personally throw in, if we're taking note or whatever, so where it says from publicly operated transit.
Could you tell us what paragraph you're in?
Sure, the last paragraph of page 4, the sentence that I think we're all struggling with. So the ATS, verbatim, and then when it gets to transit and paratransit providers, we change that to whatever language, and then from there just say, and selected individuals who are seniors or people with disabilities representing the full scope of met and unmet needs inherent to our community. That's would be my suggestion. What
are you doing with the idea of it being a majority?
I completely agree with you about, in advocacy we have the phrase nothing about us without us. And at the same token, we have to make some sort of effort to include folks that, I think, Rita, you phrased it pretty well, that actually where their level of need may be a barrier to being able to contribute directly in this process. So I think there's a best of both worlds. Maybe stakeholders representing the entire community. I'm
having trouble, if I might. Stakeholders, to me, doesn't tell me which group you're talking about.
Well, I definitely think maybe, I really don't think that there's a rubric or a standard of measure to say 53% and a half of a person should be this and 20 should be that. I just think that we should represent the full scope of our community in both met and unmet needs between people with developmental disabilities, and people who are seniors. And maybe if you're going to couple both together, say providers and individuals should be over 50%. Direct providers to individuals and individuals themselves should be the majority of the group. Maybe that's the way to find consensus.
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. Could you repeat that sentence?
So You asked about what you had asked?
Just the last sentence, I just didn't
So-
quite catch what you said. I'm sorry.
Providers, so people actually providing services directly to the group of stakeholders we're selecting, as well as individuals. Maybe that's where we find a happy medium and say that should be over 50, that should be the majority.
The users.
Direct individuals and individuals
What are direct
that represent-
individuals?
You would be a direct, you would be an
A
individual.
user. Is it the same thing?
You're an individual with a disability, right? Self-identified
Mm-hmm.
disability. And then Debbie would be somebody who represents other individuals directly who have disabilities, correct? So maybe we say that we lump those two categories together and say that should be the majority of the group.
That's all there is.
One more time?
Isn't that all there is? What else is there?
Providers.
So I guess I'm sorry, Tom, I'm
She's a
discounting
provider
the
also.
providers.
No, but
Sorry, which is she?
providers, we're talking about the transit providers.
Oh, transit providers? Who was speaking? I couldn't even.
It was me, Janet. I said to Josh, I'm sure, I took it on face value that we'd have a representation at the table. We weren't going to get forgotten. Otherwise, nobody's going anywhere.
Okay. And more comments? Rita?
I'm going to get out of that paragraph for a moment.
That's okay.
The one before it, the big paragraph, I totally agree with that one. I like it.
Jennifer?
I don't have any comments.
Anybody else want to? Debbie, is that you?
So we were just
Oh,
we
whose
just
light
had a
is on?
quick sidebar.
Right here.
Maybe the answer would be advocates and individuals, because then it doesn't matter because Debbie in this role you fit the role of an advocate right now, correct? And that makes sense because she's representing individuals that might not be appropriate for this group to sit here and be at the table, and direct individuals. I think that's probably the closest we'll get to something.
So what is your position on the concept of most of the people should be people who are users? What I would call users, which maybe is stakeholders, the word stakeholders. And I don't know if that's what I want. Is stakeholders and users the same word? No. What's a stakeholder?
So in this role, I sit on this board as a representative of the DD Council, so that makes me a stakeholder of that group. I'm not I don't have a physical, other than vision, a self-identified physical disability. But as a stakeholder and an advocate, I do represent, 8,000 plus residents of Contra Costa County and 500 providers. So I'm not a provider, and I'm not necessarily an individual, but I am an advocate, and that makes me a stakeholder here. But I'm not a user. I'm not a direct user until I go jump on the bus or BART, and then I'm a user. I think.
I'll speak again on behalf of those of us who are not, I don't know what self-identified means either. I've heard that.
You've heard it means some people have invisible disabilities, and until you self-identify or come forward, it's an invisible disability.
Oh, okay. The point I'm trying to get at is that the users of the system need to be the number one voice. I would like it, that means 50% plus one, I guess. It doesn't mean that anyone else has no voice. But certainly, historically, in paratransit in this county, people who are the very ones who use the system have not been the majority voice. And I think this would be a great time for that to change. Go ahead.
I have to leave. I'm sorry. I thought this meeting was only an hour, so my apologies. But
Is it? I don't,
it's been an hour and a half.
but did it say it was an hour?
I just put it on my calendar. It didn't make it real.
Oh, I actually thought we were on time here. But go ahead.
So
Say
I would just say in my parting notes and my apologies to the group, I'm very satisfied with the way it's written. I also really like the way that Josh worded wherever it was. I think he has it written down to go back to the one sentence, providers and selected individuals who are seniors or people with disabilities representing the full scope of met and unmet needs inherent to our community. I think that does a really good job of making it a very inclusive and exhaustive category. And I don't think that any one group has any more weight on an input board. I think that there needs to be equal representation from every group, and that would be my final say. Have a nice day. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, the one question I would have for you is there a formulaic way to make that happen? Just because you have 50% plus one, if you don't have the right people at the table at the time, you're not going to be the majority. You're not going to be influencing the group. So I think it's really the scope of.
Well, you don't have a voice at all if you don't. Yeah, I mean, that's like a separate issue, and that's on, if you look around this table, not that it's an example of that, it isn't, but if you look at how many of what group aren't here, the people with disabilities that are supposed to be, and seniors that are supposed to be sitting here, mostly the positions, I don't know about mostly, and a lot of the positions, I have it written down maybe, I believe 8 of the positions are not filled. If I got that right. I might not have, I'm not sure. It doesn't matter really. But the point is, and then many of the operators have not shown up. But the people with disabilities and seniors, the people in those groups have not even been selected. So that to me speaks highly of what's not going right now. And that's a lot of why I'm saying this and why when I first showed up. When I go to other county meetings that are similar, because this committee is required or at least it used to be, I think it still is. Is it, Peter, still required committee? Yes. So all 9 Bay Area counties have one of these committees. Most of them, don't even let operators on. I don't know about most, but some of them don't let operators on the committee. It's all users, to give you an idea. And we can't even, depending on how we would vote, we're questioning whether or not they can even be, the people who use the system can even be 50%. That's the difference here. And Michael?
There would be a possibility, especially the way you worded that, Josh, the way Josh worded it, is you could, if you said the ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from publicly operated paratransit providers and selected individual users, representatives / advocates, and that you could make the individual users would be 34% and the rest 33. That would add up to 100%, and you would have the users with a slight majority among the 3 as opposed to the entire group.
I have to make a suggestion here. The people who write this stuff for a living, for the voters to understand it, will not be happy with the 33%. It's too much detail at this point. I think we can safely say, it doesn't have to be in here, but there is a strong suggestion from the PCC that when this committee is put together, that there is more representation of participants from users than from the other categories. And, you know, I don't think writing it here makes it necessarily that much more exciting to the voters. It's just more stuff they have to read that's going to confuse them.
Right. My comment was not meant, I wasn't expecting it to be inserted. I was just suggesting that that would be a number that could give users more.
Because the other two groups band together, and that's how the user group always loses.
Well,
But the advocate group represents individuals. Those people, that's their job, is to represent individuals. The only group that represents a corporate interest would be the providers.
We agree to disagree, I guess. Did anyone over here have something?
I was just going to say, when Peter, I was only going to clarify, I think what you said is a good point. But instead of using the word users, we should specify that by users we mean seniors and people with disabilities. Because users could be interpreted a little more broadly than that, and that's Janet's point about this. When we say users, we mean people riding these services or in need of these services.
Can I make a suggestion? So is everybody okay with the big paragraph? Paragraph 2. Okay, so here's my suggestion. I'll throw mine into the hat too.
Okay.
See how it bounces. The ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from publicly operated paratransit providers and stakeholders and users representing seniors and people with disabilities with mobility barriers.
Say that again. The last
I'll
part.
just start partway through.
Okay.
Publicly operated paratransit providers and stakeholders and users representing seniors and people with disabilities with mobility barriers.
I don't think that. Speaking from the point of view of a user, it doesn't help me. Because I think it's saying that the people who are being paid to participate, the people who are getting a salary, who are doing this work as part of their salary job, are the same as people who ride the service. Is that what that's saying? I think the way you said it says that, right?
It's what it's saying is those, I think, like has been said, Josh represents several thousand people, even though he himself isn't a user of the service. He represents a lot of people that do use the service, and he speaks for all of them and all of their needs versus one of them who might have very specific needs.
But here's the issue. You say that he represents all of those people. I think I'm one of those people.
I do not believe so.
I don't know who your people are, but
So I actually represent the developmental disabilities
Well, my
category.
granddaughter is a regional center client, so I don't know if you represent me now or not. But he hasn't spoken to me about it, right? So there are a lot of people who the difference is getting a story firsthand and not getting a story firsthand. And by the way, if I had acquired all my disabilities by age 18, you would represent me, okay? I happen to know that. But The point is that people can best represent themselves. And if you have a group of people doing something like this process here, the ATS strategic plan, then you'll have a fair representation. All I actually am asking is that most of the people be people with disabilities or seniors. And people are having a hard time with that. And that to me is kind of worrisome because it means you don't really want us around when you're doing it all. That is what that's saying to me. Because I didn't say anywhere we can't have public operators. I didn't say we can't have paratransit providers. And I didn't say we couldn't have nonprofit people on here. I'm just saying that a majority of them ought to be users, who actually ought to experience what it's like to use the system themselves.
And I think to be fair to what I was saying is, as I said, stakeholders and users, and I got away from the whole percentage of this, percentage of that. I agree with you. If we can find users that will represent users in an appropriate way, I think it's wrong that one person who's a user, because they're going to represent themselves. They're not going to represent their neighbor or their friend who also has a disability, but might have a completely different perspective on what's important. That's all I'm trying to say. If you want to make it a majority of users, that's fine. I'm just trying to capture all of the possible sides here with this statement so that we can put this paragraph to rest.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one thing, again, I do think the majority, it makes sense to have advocates and people with disabilities making up the majority of this. I do disagree that my interests would put me in cahoots with Tom. I'll pick on Tom the majority of the time. But maybe what we should, I would worry us from doing some sort of formulaic breakdown, but instead, why not list people first? So right now, use Peter's language, but put the group that we want to have the most focus be listed first.
Yeah, that sounds great. Participation with users and stakeholders representing.
Maybe direct users and other stakeholders representing all of them.
Service users, direct service users. Okay. Well, I'll leave it up to you guys as a PCC to make, because somebody's going to have to represent this to me. This will have to be represented to the authority on Wednesday night, so.
Tom? I'm sorry.
And Janet,
Michael?
you sit on the board, correct?
Yeah.
So you obviously would be the person who would represent this group there, right? Because you actually sit on the board, as I understand it.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you could designate somebody else to come. You can give up their Wednesday night to do it, or you can just do it since you're there already.
Kim?
First of all, I think that your wording is perfect, and I like the fact that you use the word mobility barriers, so find a way to keep that in there, please. I'm hoping that I'm not getting out a can opener for this big tin of worms and sitting right in front of me, but I have a question about the last paragraph. I like the fact that it says that the plan must be adopted within 12 months. What happens if it's not? Does it default to this current proposed funding distribution in order for the funds to start within the year? Or is there no so-called fail-safe for that yet?
There is no so-called fail-safe for that yet, and I think another item that we still need to discuss that we didn't was this whole idea of the 12-month or doing the study and the time it takes. So
I'm sorry, continue.
I think the authority likes the idea of the study. If there's just a suggestion that somehow there's funding that occurs during that, and maybe we need to really clarify that the study won't stop any funding coming from the existing Measure J, that it's not subject to this study. Only this 3.3% is subject to this study.
And I think that's the part that needs to be clear because that was brought up before,
Yeah.
thinking that there would be no funding, but
Right.
Measure J does continue.
That's correct.
So yes, if we can put a sentence in for that and think about what happens after the 12 months if the study is not or the plan is not adopted, then what happens at that
Yeah.
point?
We split it.
Anybody else on this side? Anybody on this side? Okay.
Kim?
Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair. You think it would be acceptable? I'm just trying to think of something simple that if the plan is not adopted within 12 months, that the authority board could allocate the funds until, at some level until the plan is adopted. That way it's not tying everybody down, tonight or today or this week, but gives the opportunity for the board to take some action with that funding.
Well, one thing could be that it just be done according to the same formula as Measure J say.
It could. I don't
I
think
mean,
that.
given that they've bent over in both C and J backwards, they've already taken it out of lost years there, so to speak, money. In the Measure C lost money because they didn't start it right away, right? So the people who would have used it the first few, I think it was a couple of years, were not able to.
Mm-hmm.
And then in J, it was that they had the formula, we still have the formula, where most of the money on it, you don't say if it's 20 years, divide by 20 to figure out this year. It's less than that. And then each year, it's an increasing percentage amount. And the maximum percentage amount occurs in the last year, I think, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Vaguely. And so once again, the person who's already alive that would benefit from this doesn't, because they're not going to live to that very end point or whatever to take advantage of all of that. And they're the ones participating in paying the taxes, not the person 20 years out. Along with all the other current residents. Residents, wrong word. Right. No, right word. Right word. So that could be the thing that would kick in after a certain period of time if this was, because it could take a number of months just to get the people on the committee, right?
Well, it could. But here's a scenario. If we just distribute it out to the same 7 operators that are getting it now, where's their motivation to ever adopting the study? Then it just becomes another, the same groups get it and nobody else has.
7 operators?
7
okay,
operators
7.
in the county that get Measure J funding.
I don't know, but they got hurt by that process before, so the
I don't know how they got hurt, but
they didn't get any money the first several years in C. I was around, I remember.
okay.
Because that study took a very long time to do because nobody knew what to do. They had nobody to do it initially. There are all kinds of reasons that were perfectly valid reasons, but it just does take, you just don't, you don't complete a study like that in a week. And anyway. Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, I hate to have to do this, but I refuse to be the one that breaks quorum, but I'm going to have to leave in a few moments. So if we're going to take action, could we make a motion?
We actually have 9 people here, right?
1, 2, 3, 4. We had
Wait a
9,
minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
7, 8,
So,
right?
yeah.
Not
It's-
to pick
we-
on you, Josh, but we still have a quorum.
Oh, 5.
Yeah.
No, so in that case, would we be willing to entertain a motion at this point for action? Because I would like to motion.
You can, regardless of whether or not you're going to leave, you can make a motion.
I would love to make a motion. So I would
Okay.
motion that we ask our chair to represent the PCC this Wednesday night in asking for changes to the language as proposed, and so I'm sure diligently documented by Irene and Peter, in addition to increasing the scope of the TEP to 30 years, and thus increasing and asking at the same time that the
Can you make a list, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something?
so it's
So
just
1 is that.
one is adopting language that represents our community based on the PCC's input. That has sub-bullets that the guys are taking notes on.
Number 1 is that it be,
That the language be adjusted to represent our suggestions
no,
per
number
day.
1 was the 30 instead
That was
of
number 2,
20.
but we can make
Oh,
that
okay,
number 1.
never mind. Okay.
So that we also propose that the TEP be adjusted to 30 years, and the
What was
services.
number 1 then? I'm
Number
confused.
1 is changes in language,
What are they?
as documented from our meeting. So
But we need to be more specific, I think, than that.
could
Is
we
there-
ask Irene to list them as documented, or no? Or
Well,
Peter?
really, all I have is, that the paragraph with who's participating in the thing. So I would suggest that the ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from users and stakeholders representing seniors and people with disabilities with mobility barriers and publicly operated paratransit providers. And that the rest of the paragraphs stay as is.
Madam Chair.
We could add something, if the plan is not adopted in the 12 months, that the authority has the ability to, we can wordsmith it, or somebody else is going to wordsmith it. The authority has the ability to.
Shall.
The
You have to
authority.
say shall, because,
Janet, I don't know. I'm not the board, so I'm just suggesting language here. I'm not really comfortable with shall, but if the authority board decides what they want to do, then I'm just trying to help.
So
Sorry.
maybe the actual motion would be to look at paragraph 3, and then the other paragraph that has the 12 months, and then make it, maybe make it apparent that we would love to be able to weigh in on that, but we would like it to be revisited by the board. I mean, that's a broad way to address that. And then the one that I really, at the heart of the motion, I really think we should ask for the pie to be bigger. And I think the wisest way to do that is to suggest that the TEB becomes a 30-year plan, and that the funding allocated to seniors and people with disabilities be increased to 5%. Whether we get that or not, that would be the motion, and then
I'm sorry, may I also add one other thing? Is the suggestion to add that the funding will not be stopped while this plan is going on. There was a sentence we were going to add to that. Yeah.
from
And-
Measure J.
Right. And may I also say that it does specifically say that the plan will be developed and periodically updated during the term of the measure. So we know that it's not standard.
Are there any other,
I would like to motion that we ask our chairperson to represent the PCC at the Wednesday night meeting with those 3 major asks.
And I second
so
that.
I need to know what, in a nutshell, kind of the nutshell version of what they are. So 1 is.
Okay,
what?
I'll give them to you. One is that we make suggested changes to the third paragraph regarding the participation, who participates in the development of the plan.
And then
I liked
who-
my sentence, but if you guys don't like it.
Okay,
then-
I just want to write these down, I mean, just a few words version.
Well, Janet,
So
you know
who
what
is
we'll
who?
do is we'll write this all up for you, so
I
when
want to
you.
know before I vote, actually.
Oh, okay.
So who is who? Who is who?
Okay, so number one, I'm going to put words in your mouth, sorry. Number one would be to change the second paragraph to read, change the third paragraph to read, the ATS strategic plan will be developed by the authority with participation from users and stakeholders representing seniors and people with disabilities with mobility barriers, and public paratransit operators. Public transit operators in Contra Costa must participate in the ATS planning process to be eligible to receive funding in this category. The strategic plan must be adopted within 12 months of the passage of this measure. During the development of the strategic plan, Measure J funds will continue to be allocated as prescribed in Measure J, and following the ATS plan, Measure J funds will be allocated as prescribed in Measure. I'll say this will not change the allocation of funding under Measure J.
This meeting is tomorrow, right?
Wednesday.
Today is Monday, okay. The day after tomorrow, okay.
Is that good? Did I represent? Okay, that's one. Two, so that was, I killed two birds with one stone there. Is that okay? Two, that the PCC urge the board to look at a 30-year plan, and that a portion of the additional revenues.
I'm sorry. I asked for like the nut, you know, I mean the
That's what I'm
short
giving you.
version of it. This is the long version.
Well, it's a long paragraph.
Oh, I know, but I was just wanting to have like, what are the topics?
Okay, so the topic is the paragraph and revising that, and the 30-year with
Maybe,
funds.
why don't I talk to you afterwards, I guess. I can't.
You know what, I've got a meeting to go to, so I can't. So, and besides, you wanted us to be able to vote on this now.
I know, but it's like not happening, I guess. Let me ask questions and
Okay.
that'll direct it. Okay, so one is, I don't know what the right order is, so don't worry about it. It doesn't matter about that. Okay, one is who is on it, right? Who's
Okay.
on the committee?
Mhm.
Okay, number two is 30 years and 5%, right?
Mhm.
What's number three?
That's just two.
That's two.
We put number three in with number one. If you want me to split it out, I can do that.
What is number three then?
Number
No.
three was that the funding under Measure J continues to be
Oh.
allocated.
Okay, funding under J continues, okay. And Kim had another one. Okay, what about the topic of the, okay, that is it, that is that one, yeah, okay. And there were some other there was another one, the word citizen stakeholders.
I believe that was eliminated in the reading as proposed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We took care of that part. It just
Okay.
needed rewriting.
So there are three topics then. That's what I was kind of needing to know here.
Okay, there's three topics.
There's three topics. Okay. And then I hope we have the wording, the detailed wording of it. Okay. Now we don't have a second. You second it? Okay. Kim, that was Kim. And public comment. Thank you. I don't know, but it's too low if it is on.
This one, John.
Hello, this is working. John Cunningham, I'm a transportation planner with Contra Costa County. Just wanted to make a comment on the discussion and recommendations on the composition of the oversight for the Accessible Transportation Service Strategic Plan. The way that it's being structured and discussed here is very atypical of the way oversight bodies are done for any type of plan or project. I absolutely agree that a substantial amount of input from the end user community should be brought to bear on the plan. There should be workshops and input. However, including the end user patrons on the actual oversight committee, like I say, is atypical, if not unprecedented. So obviously this body can take whatever position it wants. You should be prepared, I guess, for at the end, at the authority for that to be rejected or changed into some sort of an oversight body. I have never seen a lot of oversight groups for various studies and plans, and I've never seen this type of composition before.
This is not an oversight committee, is it?
It would be, no, not necessarily.
Okay.
It's going to be a separate committee, isn't it?
It just says here participation from. It doesn't say oversight, right? I mean, right? Okay. It's not an oversight committee. Yeah, but there doesn't say oversight committee. It says participation from. That's what it says. Okay. So we've got are there any more? So we did that side of the room, that side of the room. Are there any other public comments? Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay. All ready to vote? Or do you have a comment? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, in response to what Mr. Cunningham said, the oversight thing, that's going to be for the whole plan, right? Not just paratransit. I mean, the whole measure after it's passed.
There is proposed language in the TEP about an oversight committee for the whole measure. That's not, I think John was talking about specific to this plan, of which the language doesn't use the word oversight committee. There may be an oversight committee. The board will have to structure how they might be a policy committee. Lots of times these studies have policy, they have staff level committees and they have policy level committees or whatever. So what we're suggesting here is that we make sure that there's participation from these different groups providing input into the plan, however that participation occurs.
Okay.
Okay, so are we ready to vote then? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Okay. And I need to see you sometime or get something in writing.
Yeah. So what we'll do for the whole committee is I think we'll do in a strikeout. I mean, normally the way our board's handling this is we do a underlined strikeout version, and we'll have that at the dais for them. As the PCC took action, suggesting this language, and then we'll leave it up to Janet when that item comes up. She can speak to that, and also the 30-year stuff. The 30-year thing will probably come up separately as far as the Thursday's agenda goes. So when that comes up, she can say, the PCC discussed this at our meeting on Monday, and we would like to suggest, there was support for the 30-year And then when we get to the part where we're looking at revisions to language, she can bring up then at that point that the PCC also looked at this and has these suggested revisions.
The one thing I would throw in is if and when they get to the 30-year, throw in the hook that we would also ask that the percentage allocated to the programs that we represent be increased to 5. I mean, that's...
Okay, so I'll get...
Well, those are separate topics, really.
No,
No, they are separate topics. No. No. What I'm saying is they will not necessarily come up in the same section of the discussion.
They may not. They probably will,
Yeah.
because when they'll talk about 30 years will generate this much more money, and so it'll be, okay, how are we going to use this much more money? And then they would say, well,
Right,
we
but
want
then
that
there's
to go.
the discussion of how much of the money goes here and how much goes there. And
Right.
They are not necessarily one and the same. Anyway.
So anyway, we'll give you,
Okay.
tomorrow you're going to be available by phone or email.
Yeah, daytime. In the daytime. Okay, so we are done with that. So our next meeting, which is our regularly scheduled meeting, is on May the 16th at 2. And for those people who are on the interview committee, do you happen to remember what? It's
Michael, it's you, and it's Kim. We'll let her know.
okay, at 1:30. Okay, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.